Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to welcome you here today to today's lecture, which is part, I know it's a recording microphone. Today's lecture is part of the Provost lecture series, and both this lecture as well as the conference on post-socialism that starts tomorrow and goes through Saturday have been partially supported by the Provost office and the Dean's office, and certainly by the efforts of John Bailin and Gary Marker. Today's lecture deals with, I think, some of the changes that we all experience around us in the world. I come from a country, from Greece, that certainly has experienced some of these new changes in the recent years, and these changes have played a significant role on how the country deals with the present and the future. And Ukraine, along just like my country, is one of those countries that is part of the East and the West, and the current events are a very clear indication of how important changes are and how important it is to deal with changes and the ambivalence of belonging in both places. I'm grateful that Professor Kasianov is here today to talk to us about Ukraine and about all the his experience and his knowledge of what the current events mean. And I'm eager and very grateful that you're here and looking forward to hearing your lecture. And Professor Gary Marker is going to introduce Professor.
Okay, thank you, Stella. Well, I too am very pleased to introduce Georgiy Kasianov, who is going to speak to us about this. He is also my friend, which is another reason why I'm happy to introduce him. I have lots of things I'm going to say about him, so he will get to speak at about 7:30, if that's all right with the rest of you. But I have to stand here if I'm going to look at what I'm going to say. So, Georgiy, I'll read to you his title and all the things that he does. He is currently the head of the Department of Contemporary History and Politics at the Institute of History in the National Academy of Sciences in Ukraine. That's in Kyiv. And he is a professor at the National University Kyiv Mohyla Academy, which is the university in Kyiv that we really like, but we can talk about that later. And he is taught in a number of other places as well. He is, to my mind, I'm going to wander around. I'm sorry, I can't stand still. To my mind, Georgiy is an academic public intellectual in absolutely the very best sense. Not one who just shows up on TV shows or radio shows for 30-second sound bites. Georgiy, I'm going to tell you some of the things that he's published in a minute, but he is a very prominent figure where he appears in the media, print media, electronic media, in several countries, in Western Europe, in Ukraine, I don't know, in Russia too? Yes. Also in Russia, and in the United States. He's published actively in the United States as well, and his languages of publication that I've found, the languages I can read anyway, are in English and in Russian and Ukrainian. And he, for those of you who have been following what's been going on in our part of the world, there was a long article in the New Yorker about a year ago by David Remnick about what was happening in Ukraine. And much of the article was an interview with Georgiy. So he has played a very active role in generating high-level and complex public discussion in a subject that lends itself to low-level diatribe and accusation, which I guess is better than violence, but unfortunately it has lent itself to a lot of violence as well. I want to pick up a little bit on what Stella said, because Georgiy's topic is simultaneously specific to the post-Soviet sphere, to this long and complicated relationship between Ukraine and Russia, or things Ukrainian or Ruthenian and Russian, and that goes back a long way. But it is also part of the world in which all of us live. That is, we are living under circumstances, I'm not saying anything profound, that we would never have anticipated, in which identities, memories, places, senses of social cohesion and the like have never been more complicated and have never been more essential, in which the articulation of a kind of pure identity takes place in a world in which those pure identities have less and less relationship to the way we actually live and to the physical places in which we actually live. In a world in which the articulation of a pure identity, whether it's national, ethnic, linguistic, or religious, almost invariably invokes a great deal of violence. This is something that we read about in many parts of the world. And in that sense, the issues that Georgiy is going to talk about today are endemic to the world in which we live. So it is a very timely topic. Now, before I introduce him, you are going to have to hear me read a list of some of the things he's published. Okay. He recently participated in a forum in this journal, Kritika, which is a very important journal in my field. And most of the forum was devoted to what's going on in Ukraine today, and his contribution was how a war for the past becomes a war in the present. Much of Georgiy's scholarly work is about historical memory in the 20th century, is about the recuperation or the redeployment of historical memory for political ends in this new and entirely unpredictable world in which we live. He bases that on a good deal of research he did a few years before on an event that is actually absolutely central to modern Ukrainian national consciousness. And that's what's called the Great Famine, or Holodomor, of 1932-33. It is a hotly debated issue between Russia and Ukraine, and certainly within Ukraine itself. So he has published things such as The Great Famine of 32-33, Holodomor, on the politics of history in contemporary Ukraine. He has published something called The Nationalization of History in Ukraine. I'm going to translate from Russian now. How General History is Subdivided, the Politics of Memory in Ukraine, Poland, and Russia in the 1990s and 2000s. The Great Famine, I'm translating again, The Great Famine and the Construction of a Nation, and on and on and on. He's also written something that, if there's any administrators in the room, they'll want to hear about, called Quality Assurance and Quality Control in Ukrainian Higher Education. You know, I hope that's not going to be the subject of his lecture today. Thank heavens, because I would have to leave. Anyway, I am very, very pleased that Georgiy has come here. I hope all of you also make an effort to come to the two-day conference that John is primarily responsible for, that begins tomorrow right after lunch, 1 o'clock. That will have, in this room, it will have several presentations dealing not specifically with Russia and Ukraine, although they will be part of it, but dealing with the whole post-socialist world, called post-socialist because we don't have a better term for it, in basically the whole Eastern Bloc, or what used to be called the Eastern Bloc. So I am going to stop now, and I'm just going to say welcome, Georgiy.
Thank you. So it's just for recording. It's not for.
No.
Okay. Huh?
Never trust me.
Okay.
So he doesn't need this, right?
I don't need. Okay.
No.
So okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot for this great introduction. I do work at the Academy of Sciences. It's not a teaching institution. It's a research institution. So most of my life I devoted to research. However, I also teach at several institutions, including Berlin Free University, teaching exactly the topic, well, the history, Central and East European history between East and West, Eastern Europe. So I would like to decipher this picture. It is from 2001, and it was one of the moments when Ukraine was also at one of these turning decisive points of its history. And so you see this push me, pull you horse, which symbolized the, well, let's say, ambivalence of choice and ambivalence of intentions between SNG, which is a Commonwealth of Independent States, which is the superstructure for former Soviet Union, and European Union. And of course, you have this emblematic figure of Cossack, of, well, it's kind of character, national character. It's very much praised in Ukraine. It's, well, as I said, very emblematic figure, and it's very thoughtful and, well, it thinks about something, where to go. And this ambivalence was a kind of, well, of the most profound feature of Ukrainian national identity, if we speak about collective identity. Where to go to the West, which is in, well, the common understanding is a civilization, is a civilized world, and the East, which is in many cases identified with Russia, with authoritarianism, and with even totalitarianism. So this is the option. And this option lasted for Ukraine for almost let's say 200 or 100 years. And now Ukraine is at the moment of its history when Ukraine has to make a decisive move somewhere. And this decision was made a year ago, and I will try to prove it. And this decision costs Ukraine territorial losses. Ukraine lost Crimea. It was annexed by Russia. And it costs Ukraine at this moment about 6,000 of lives of civilians and militants, because we have war in the east of the country. So this is not just about speculations. It's not just about representations of something. It is also about real life and implications of certain visions for real life and for real events in Ukraine and around. So to simplify things, when we speak about imaginations, representations, or perceptions of East and West in Ukraine, in, let's say, mass consciousness and collective understanding, is that Europe is the West. US also, but Europe is really the West for Ukrainians, and Russia is the East. It's something which, well, in fact, it's North and East for Ukraine, but it's in imaginations, in imagined Russia, it's the East. It's autocracy, and it's kind of sometimes even some forms of barbarism, whatever. And it reduplicates the old scheme which was invented in the end of 18th century, East and West. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with Larry Wolff's famous book about invention of Eastern Europe. So Ukraine was located at the margins of both East and West. Ukraine was a borderland for the West for centuries, and also Ukraine was a borderland for the East. It was between. And this ambivalent position was kept for once again for almost 200 years, and it has become a kind of habit of self-understanding and self-representation of itself in the outside world and for ourselves also. So I would just try to compile a list of different forms of representations of this paradigm, Ukraine between East and West. Before I will start comment this list, I would like to remind you about this dilemma, East-West dilemma, if you will look through scholarly literature on the topic, you will find something which might be quite surprising for an unprepared reader. For instance, you will find article France between East and West. France is, well, in general perception and collective imagination, is a truly Western country, and one of those countries which started the process of modernization in the, let's say, Western world. You will find article like, scholarly article like Sweden between East and West. And then, if we speak about representations, perceptions, or imaginations, we would ask Portugal, about Portugal, the most Western country in the West, in the Western Europe. Is it East and West? And you will find an article about Portugal between East and West. So it's not about spaces. It's not about geography. It's about imaginations, perceptions, and representations of something. So the same applies to Ukraine. So Ukraine has a kind of, well, really, we have some kind of specifics in this, within this dilemma. First of all, and I can find it here, that Ukraine has its own West and the East. Ukraine was divided between East and West politically for centuries. Western part of Ukraine belonged to Habsburg's empire, and eastern part to Romanov's empires, with very different sets of political principles and political developments. So Ukraine also, part of Ukraine also belonged to Ottoman Empire, if we speak about Crimea. So the territory itself and history itself was divided between three empires. Two of them belonged to the East and to Eastern culture. I would not go in depth with comments about what Eastern culture means. I believe that the majority of you understands this, of course, once again, imaginable division. Anyway, Ukraine was divided internally, and there was no Ukraine as such. There was no Ukraine as a country. There were different territories which belonged to different empires, and then all these territories have become single territory in the 20th century. The last date when Ukraine got its contemporary, well, unfortunately now it's not contemporary, political shape was 1954, when Crimea was attached to Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and then since 1954 Ukraine existed until 2014 in its shape which was recognized by international community. And definitely the legacies of these divisions, legacy of these different influences of different cultures, of course they were obvious, and they are obvious in Ukraine now. And I will comment it more extensively a bit later. So the list of different representations of Ukraine between. Ukraine as a natural part of Western Europe. It's very popular nationalist myth that Ukrainian nation, which of course exists eternally, belonged to the Western European culture eternally once again. So Ukrainians are part of Western proper, or of course European proper. I'm speaking about nationalist paradigm. Ukraine between the East and the West, it's a natural form of self-perception of, let's say, part of intellectuals who recognize the presence of mixed elements of cultures, which might be signified as Eastern culture and Western culture. Ukraine as a borderland between East and West. Yes, it's really, and it was, these territories really were a borderland between two worlds. However, the same can be said, for instance, about Czech Republic, about Slovaks, about Hungary, about Poland, about whatever. So the whole region was a borderland, and Ukraine was a part of this region. Ukraine as a barrier between East and West, it's a very popular myth, also in whole Eastern Europe, when some nations represent themselves as a barrier between the wild East, between, let's say, nomad tribes, and between civilized West. So sometimes it can be reproduced as, we have saved the West, we have saved the Europe, for instance, during the Mongols' invasion in 13th century. So it is very often represented in historical mythology of Ukrainians and also of many Eastern European nations. So Ukraine as a contact zone or frontier between two worlds, yes. And it's not only a myth, it's also a true reality. It's a contact zone where different cultures meet, mix, and coexist. This vision is also mostly represented by, mostly by scholars. Ukraine as a bridge, once again, different cultures, exchanges between different cultures, and Ukraine serves as a bridge between different cultures. Finally, well, not finally, Ukraine as a East and West conflict zone. East meets West in Ukraine, and then we have a conflict. And this can be illustrated by contemporary situation when some people represent the conflict in Ukraine, in the Eastern Ukraine, as a conflict between Western world and Russia. When they met in Ukraine and when they tried to defend their interests. I read an article written by American sociologist, and he called Ukraine Russia's backyard, and tried to, let's say, justify Russian actions there by Russian interests at their backyard. And there are also some articles which represent U.S. interests in Ukraine, and they represent the conflict in Ukraine as a conflict between U.S., Western Europe, and Russia. And this is in this case, it's Ukraine represented as a conflict zone. And then Ukraine as a crossroad of civilizations. Yes, if you look at the religious map of Ukraine, you will see Orthodox communities, and Orthodox Church has three denominations in Ukraine: Moscow Patriarchy, Kyiv Patriarchy, and Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We have Catholics there, we have Muslims, and we have 25% of communities, religious communities in Ukraine are Protestants. So it's very mixed, great mix of cultures, religious legacies, historical legacies, etc. So Ukraine can be represented as a crossroads of different civilizations. I already commented Ukraine's own West and East. And finally, the newest form of representation of Ukrainian position between East and West as Ukraine as East of the West or West of the East. Now, after 2005-2013, after enlargement of European Union, when the easternmost border of the European Union and, let's say, Europe moved eastward, then Ukraine has become the most western part of the imagined East and the most eastern part of the imagined West. I can say that Ukrainians do not like this and do not very much appreciate it to be east of the West and west of the East. But in terms of, let's say, real politics, they do not have real choice. So now I'm moving to the part which is about internal division of Ukraine on East and West. So about, let's say, 25 years ago, I don't remember exactly, it was 1991, I believe, when Huntington published his famous article about civilization divide. And it is interesting that the line which divides Eastern and Western civilizations was drawn over Dnieper River. So Ukraine was divided into parts. In 1994, the CIA has published a report about political situation in Ukraine, and they prospect of split of Ukraine on two parts was estimated as a high. So that was even in analysis of this institution, that Ukraine might be divided on two parts. And then in the end of 90s, there was a great discussion within Ukrainian intellectual circles about two Ukraines. One of the, let's say, popular writers wrote an article, Two Ukraines. And his idea was to represent west of Ukraine, Lviv, city of Lviv, westernmost, one of the biggest and most important cities in the west, and Donetsk, one of the biggest and most important cities in the east. And the idea was that western part of Ukraine is more civilized, more advanced, more organized, and has more, let's say, features of civil society. And the eastern part of Ukraine is backward and less civilized and has less features of civil society. So this oversimplified scheme provoked an ardent discussion between different intellectual groups. And then there was an article which I liked, title I liked very much. The first article was Two Ukraines, and the second was 22 Ukraines. And that was the point. Ukraine cannot be, in certain terms, Ukraine cannot be represented as a dichotomy, East-West dichotomy. There is a lot of different regions, a lot of different legacies, and a lot of different representations and self-representations of different regions. It's true that that we have 22 Ukraines or 222 Ukraines, whatever you will choose as a point of reference. In any case, this dichotomy works only for certain kind of representation and certain kind of interest. However, if we'll speak in most general terms about orientations of populations, orientations of big collectivities, so then we will see that it is to a great extent, this dilemma is true, that a great portion of population believes that it should belong to the West, should go there, and great portion of population believes that it should remain in the area of influence of Russia, or which is in their imaginations represented as, well, probably as the East. Nobody knows, because nobody make any deep research of this kind of imaginations, how Russia is represented in the minds of millions of people citizens of Ukraine in the East. So I would like to show you the map. It's a humorous map, the Russian vision of the Europe. And it's a popular series of humorous maps. I'm sure that you are familiar with the American versions of these maps, like US from the point of view of Massachusetts, or US from the point of view of New York. Then you see the big New York City or big Manhattan, and then the rest of the world. So it is quite popular genre now. And I would like to turn your attention just to one point here. You see Russia, and you see how Ukraine is perceived by Russians. It's southern Russia. And this is very important. It's about jokes, but it's really important for understanding of the phenomena. Why Russians consider this autonomization or separation of Ukraine so painfully. For majority of them, Ukrainians are not the others. We're not the others. They were part of the self. So if you have your right or left hand which starts to work separately and do not listen to your commands, probably you will have real conflicts, and probably you will have real troubles. So this is exactly about this. It's about humor, but it's really very great in representing the sense of understanding of what's going on in Ukraine, of the fact how Russians understand this. Ukrainians have some kind of, well, different understanding of this, and I would like to give you very simple visual representations of how it's worked. You see the map, electoral map of 1994, exactly the date when CIA published its report. And you see that majority of central and western Ukraine voted for Mr. Kravchuk, and most of eastern and partly central and southern Ukraine and Crimea voted for Mr. Kuchma, who represented exactly, this was the first point when one person represented certain orientation, spatial orientation. And Kuchma was considered exactly as pro-Russian president. And Mr. Kravchuk was perceived as a, not too much as a pro-European, but not pro-Russian. And then we have first visual representation of how it looked like about 20 years ago. So this is the next presidential election. Mr. Kuchma did not explore too much the idea of pro-Russianism in 1999 during the second elections. But in 2004, there were another presidential elections. And then the idea of pro-Western or pro-Russian orientation was really at the top. And then you see, once again, you see central Ukraine and western Ukraine voted for pro-European president, and eastern Ukraine and the majority of southern Ukraine for pro-Russian president. And then what I like about this map is that it really represents certain kind of orientations. What I don't like about this map is how political scientists tried to instrumentalize it in terms of really splitting Ukraine. And in introducing this as a kind of permanent situation, you understand that presidential elections and everyday life are quite different things. If you try to impose the idea of situation which happens during presidential elections to everyday life, then you might have some kind of biases. So, last year elections, 2014, already after Maidan revolution, already during the war in Donbass, and this is presidential elections. So, deep red, or I don't know, brown, now it looks like brown, it is about local communities who voted for the president who announced that his super idea and his idea fix or his aim, his goal is to join European Union. So you see that at this point, majority of population voted for this president. And if you look at the territories marked with 3 and 2, Crimea at this point was lost for Ukraine, so they didn't vote. And then the territories you see marked by figure 3, at this moment we're under war. And this is exactly, these territories, exactly, this is Donbass, the easternmost part of Ukraine, which wants to join Russia. So, let's speak about choices. It's about sociology now. I'm starting this table from October 2011. Before this date, there were a number of different sociological polls, sociological reviews, sociological research based on focus groups, and generally, if we speak about all Ukraine, there was great ambivalence about choice between CIA or custom union, which represented the CIA or CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, and pro-Western orientations. So then in 2011, it started. There was a kind of some changes some changes started in attitudes. So if you will see if you look at this table, so accession to EU, accession to custom union. Custom union is a union which is imposed by Putin to neighboring countries, and is a part of economical strategy aimed in reintroducing kind of a system of economic relationship between neighbors and Russia. And in fact, it's about reestablishing Russia as a dominant force in this region, which is, by the way, well, to a great extent, does not need political framework, because Russia really is well, the most important economical, most important power in this region. However, if you look at the attitudes of population, you will see that from 2011 to May 2014, you see the growth of those who were pro-European interested. Then accession to custom union, you see that the number of these people is shrinking, and the number of those who do not want access any kind of union also grew. So this is about all Ukraine and about changes of attitudes. Where is it? So the regional aspect, May 2014, once again, it's presidential elections this month, and also, well, war at Donbass already on. So in the Western Ukraine, you see that majority of population is pro-European. In Central Ukraine, majority is pro-European. And the most interesting thing is East. If you look at accession to EU, accession to custom union, you will see that the ambivalence is there, is in the East. But it is without Donbass. And Donbass, the easternmost part, is still about staying with Russia. Accession to custom union, 76%, and accession to European Union, only 13%. So I'm going to finalize all these points and to make a kind of generalizations. When we speak about let's formulate this way. When ordinary Ukrainian addressed with this question, what are you for? For East, for the West, where you want to go? You probably would not receive a well-structured opinion and respond. It depends on what do you mean when you're asking about East and West, of what you mean. If you will ask Western Ukrainian who spent, well, let's say ordinary man of, well, the age from 30 to 45, who spends about 8 to 10 months in the Western Europe, working there, sometimes illegally, and then this part of population sends to Ukraine every year, sends almost $9 billion, which they raised there in the West. So if you ask them, this person, are you for West? So you understand what will be the response. If you will ask ordinary man in Donetsk, miner worker, who works in the mines and then gives his salaries, and then what he knows about Western Europe. He knows that Western Europe supports gay culture, which is absolutely unacceptable for him. That Western Europe allows marriages, gay marriages, so you will receive a extremely negative response. But if you will go in kind of in-depth interview and will ask, well, once again, ordinary Ukrainian, what you expect from being part of the West, then you probably will get very interesting response, which gives you some doubts about true understanding of what Western Europe or West is for this person. Because it was my personal impression. It is not supported by research, but it's, well, as a, let's say, hypothesis, it can be presented. So my hypothesis is that for the great portion of population, I don't know which portion, the Western dimension and the accession to EU and the accession to European structures, etc., is based on some kind of patrimonial expectations. That Europe will come to our country and will make order here. That European structures will come here and they will enforce our oligarchs to act, to behave in a good way. And this is also a part of pro-European dimension and pro-European orientation. So when we speak about the choices between East and West, when we speak about expectations, about legacies, etc., even if we speak about great myth of the Westernness of Ukraine, it also bears, all these attitudes also bear a good deal of this kind of patrimonial expectations, because belonging to advanced Western civilizations means that we are also advanced, but also the West is our father, like Russia was a big brother or older brother. So in this case, there is no great difference in attitudes and expectations. So, and then if we, well, speculate about this or have discussions about this, we always have to take into account this multi-level system of hierarchies, of understandings, representations, etc., etc. It's extremely complicated matter. So when I have simplified this in visual images, etc., it just was made just for the sake of well, certain kind of representation and certain kind of generalized visions. If you go in depth, then you have much more complicated picture, and this is my task when I speak to students, to spoil their lives and to complicate things as much as possible. And I hope that today I also was successful in pursuing this task and to present this in a more complicated manner than it might be. At this point, I would like to stop and to thank you for your attention and to move to open discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.